In the rough editing stages, I was able to preview my thriller opening to a group of people within my target age range, which was 16 to 17. They answered surveys on technical quality and appeal of my thriller, like are many camera angles used and are there any parts that you disliked and why. From here I was able to alter my thriller accordingly to ensure that it attracted my target audience. A large number of respondents stated that they thought the shots where Aoife looked worried were irrelevant and broke the flow of the thriller. Therefore, I was able to remove them to ensure my thriller ran smoothly and appeal to my target audience. Another response that I received was that the effects that I applied to my clips made them look somewhat unrealistic. So I was able to alter the effects to make the overall appearance more like nighttime. Additionally, the biggest change that I made was the outset of my opening. The overlay of the water running off the knife and the diegetic bag packing scene was altered after I was advised that the diegetic sound would make the thriller suspense and tension increase. However, despite these three queries, the feedback that I received about sound, lighting and camera angles, camera shots and everything else was quite positive. Another more implicit way that I attracted the audience was through the unsteady, extreme close-up shots of the newspaper. I thought that having random words like single stab, devastating and E for 17 would help build the narrative further and help the flow of the opening. This attracts the audience by making them curious as to what happened to Aoife and therefore raise their feeling of suspense. In terms of what I've learnt during this process, I've learnt quite a lot. Before editing on Final Cut Express, I had only used Sony Vegas, which is quite different from Final Cut, and I thought that it would be fairly similar, but it turns out that the editing process and the editing is actually quite different. I also learned a lot about the way that the editing works, about how you can overlay different effects and overlay different clips to make it a completely different type of scene. I learned about the different camera angles and movements, of which I knew some of them, but I wasn't quite sure on all of them. And I particularly utilised these when thinking about filming the different shots. In terms of narrative structure, I also learned quite a lot about the way that I sequenced my shots. When I had my feedback from the preview that I gave to my target audience, a lot of them said that the scene with the woods was too long. So I learned how to sequence the shots so that I could break it up and disturb the flow of the thriller without breaking the flow of the overall appearance of it. I think the biggest thing that I learned was with LiveType, because I had never used LiveType. Crucially, in the preliminary task, I worked in a group, which was very different from working on this final task, which I was working as an individual. In terms of planning, editing and shooting, it was quite different because in the preliminary task I had a group that could help me with all of the editing. But in this task I had to do it all myself and come up with all of my own effects and ideas, which I found sometimes quite hard because working in a group you get lots of people's opinions and ideas, but working by yourself you have to sort of think about what everybody else will like. So with regards to planning, shooting, soundtrack and title, I've had to learn to organise a cast, props and different shot types, essentially sequence my whole piece together and then film it, which in some cases I think I did well and in some cases I don't think I did so well. This is due to the sequencing of the shots. I actually didn't do that until after I filmed because I wasn't fully clear on what I wanted the image to look like before I filmed. This could be seen as a bad thing just because I wasn't fully aware when I went to the shoot what I wanted it to look like, but I think it turned out as a good thing just because I was able to experiment more and test different shots that I hadn't thought of beforehand, and many of these ended up being used in my actual final sequence. One of the things that I did get from the feedback was that people weren't necessarily able to read the narrative of my film, which is why I broke it down and sort of reconstructed it during the editing process. I think this has helped because in the viewings that I have shown people afterwards, they've said that they understand the narrative more clearly and they're able to understand it. I think in terms of strengths and weaknesses of the production, my strengths have definitely been the editing process. This is because I had previous experience with editing, so I managed to pick it up quite quickly because although the software that I had used before was quite different to Final Cut Express, and I was able to experiment more after I'd edited the sequence together. So I could test a variety of effects and see how they all looked. I think a weakness of my production was definitely the planning stage, because as I was working as an individual, I found it quite hard to collect the cast and the equipment and the props together on the right days, because I was reliant heavily on the actors and actresses being there on time, which fortunately they were. But I just found this stage quite difficult. I think the most important thing that I've learned about making films that I didn't before is the overall production of them. How to come up with a narrative, sequence my shots, do all of the editing and everything by myself without having to rely on other people. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned from creating Run.